The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Ravenshollow Palace as Lady Isabella Thornwick adjusted her silk gloves one final time. The grand ballroom buzzed with the gentle chatter of nobility, their jeweled gowns and perfectly tailored coats creating a sea of opulence that stretched across the polished marble floor. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light over the assembled guests. But Isabella felt only the cold weight of what she was about to do. At 32, Isabella had spent half her life within these palace walls. She had been appointed as lady-in-waiting to Queen Evangeline when she was barely 17, fresh from her family's estate in the northern provinces. Her father, Earl Thornwick, had been overjoyed at the honor bestowed upon his daughter. The position meant security, prestige, and a comfortable life serving the crown. What he hadn't anticipated was that his daughter would fall hopelessly in love with someone she could never have. Isabella's eyes swept across the ballroom until they found him. Captain Marcus Aldridge stood near the great fireplace, his dark blue Royal Guard uniform impeccable as always. His broad shoulders and confident posture commanded respect from everyone in the room. But it was his kind brown eyes that had captured Isabella's heart 3 years ago. Those same eyes that now avoided her gaze, knowing what tonight would bring. Their love affair had begun innocently enough. Marcus had been assigned to escort Isabella during her evening walks through the palace gardens after a series of break-ins in the surrounding neighborhoods. What started as polite conversation about the weather and palace gossip had slowly evolved into deep discussions about their dreams, fears, and the weight of duty that bound them both to lives they hadn't chosen. The first time Marcus had kissed her had been during a thunderstorm, when they had taken shelter in the old gazebo behind the rose garden. Lightning had illuminated the sky as his lips touched hers, and Isabella had felt as though her entire world had shifted on its axis. For 2 blissful years, they had met in secret, stealing moments together whenever their duties allowed. They had made plans to leave the palace together, to start a new life in one of the distant colonies where their different social stations wouldn't matter. But dreams, Isabella had learned, were fragile things that could shatter with a single revelation. Queen Evangeline swept across the ballroom floor, her emerald green gown trailing behind her like liquid silk. The thornwood tiara adorned her silver hair, its ancient diamonds catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the nearby walls. The tiara was said to be worth more than most noble estates, crafted centuries ago for the first queen of Ravenshollow and passed down through generations of royal women. Isabella forced a smile as the queen approached, accompanied by her usual retinue of advisors and ladies-in-waiting. At 68, Queen Evangeline still possessed the regal bearing that had made her one of the most respected monarchs in the known world. Her pale blue eyes missed nothing, and Isabella sometimes wondered if the queen suspected the truth about her relationship with Marcus. "Isabella, dear," the queen said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I trust you've ensured that our guests have everything they need this evening?" "Of course, Your Majesty," Isabella replied, executing a perfect curtsy. "Lord Pemberton was asking about the vintage of the wine being served, and I've arranged for the sommelier to speak with him personally. Lady Hartwell mentioned feeling a chill, so I've had additional fires lit in the eastern wing." Queen Evangeline nodded approvingly. "Excellent. You've always been so attentive to detail. It's one of the many reasons I value your service so highly." The weight of those words settled heavily on Isabella's chest. The queen's trust in her made what she was about to do feel like an even greater betrayal. But she had no choice. Not anymore. 3 weeks ago, Isabella had received a letter that changed everything. The parchment had been fine quality, sealed with black wax and bearing no identifying marks. Inside, written in an elegant hand that she didn't recognize, was information that made her blood run cold. The letter revealed that someone knew about her relationship with Marcus. Worse, it detailed exactly how such knowledge could be used to destroy both their lives. If their affair became public knowledge, Marcus would be stripped of his position and likely imprisoned for conduct unbecoming of an officer. Isabella would be banished from court in disgrace, her family's reputation ruined beyond repair. But the letter offered an alternative. If Isabella could steal 3 specific items from the royal treasury, the evidence of their relationship would disappear forever. The items requested seemed almost random. The thornwood tiara that currently adorned the queen's head, an ancient gold chalice used in coronation ceremonies, and a small jewelry box that had belonged to the first queen of Raven's Hollow. Isabella had initially dismissed the demand as impossible. The royal treasury was one of the most heavily guarded locations in the entire palace, protected by both human guards and ancient magical wards that were said to alert the entire guard force if disturbed. But, as days passed and she received no further communication from her mysterious blackmailer, the weight of keeping her secret grew unbearable. It was Marcus who had finally convinced her to consider the theft, though he had no idea of the true reason behind it. During one of their clandestine meetings, Isabella had confessed her growing anxiety about their future together. She had told him that she was considering leaving the palace, claiming that the pressure of serving the royal family was becoming too much to bear. "If we're going to leave anyway," Marcus had said, holding her close in the moonlit garden, "perhaps we should ensure we have enough resources to start our new life properly. I know it goes against everything we believe in, but the royal treasury contains items that would never be missed. We could take just enough to secure our future and disappear before anyone notices." Isabella had been shocked by the suggestion. Marcus was the most honorable man she knew, dedicated to his duty and fiercely loyal to the crown. But love, she realized, could make people consider impossible things. He had no way of knowing that someone else was pulling the strings, that their choice to steal had already been made for them. Now, as she watched the queen glide across the ballroom floor, Isabella felt the weight of the small glass vial hidden in her reticule. The sleeping potion had been easy enough to acquire from the palace physician's stores. A few drops in the queen's evening tea would ensure that she slept deeply enough for Isabella to remove the tiara without waking her. The plan was intricate but manageable. Isabella would attend to the queen as she prepared for bed, as was her usual duty. While helping the queen undress, she would slip the sleeping potion into the royal tea service. Once the queen fell into a deep sleep, Isabella would take the thornwood tiara and make her way to the royal treasury. Marcus had provided her with detailed information about the guard rotations and the locations of the magical wards. There would be a 20-minute window between midnight and 1:30 when the treasury would be accessible. During that time, Isabella would need to retrieve the gold chalice and the jewelry box, then return the tiara to the queen's chambers before morning. The jewelry box was the most puzzling part of the request. According to palace records, it was a small, unremarkable wooden box that had been among the personal effects of Queen Isadora, the first ruler of Raven's Hollow. It was said to contain letters and trinkets of sentimental value, but nothing that would be worth the enormous risk of stealing from the royal treasury. Isabella had spent hours in the palace library researching Queen Isadora and her mysterious box, but the historical records were frustratingly vague. Some accounts suggested that the box contained love letters from the queen's secret lover, while others claimed it held magical artifacts from the Old Kingdom. One particularly fantastical tale suggested that the box contained the true names of the noble families who had helped establish the kingdom, information that could be used to legitimize or destroy claims to power. Whatever the truth, someone wanted that box badly enough to orchestrate an elaborate blackmail scheme to obtain it. The evening progressed with agonizing slowness. Isabella moved through her duties mechanically, ensuring that the royal guests were entertained and comfortable while her mind raced through every detail of the plan. She caught Marcus's eye several times across the room, and each time he gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. At 10:30, Queen Evangeline announced her intention to retire for the evening. Isabella followed her mistress through the corridors to the royal chambers, her heart pounding so loudly that she was certain the guards they passed could hear it. The queen's chambers were a study in understated elegance. Rich tapestries covered the stone walls, and a fire crackled warmly in the marble fireplace. The four-poster bed was draped in silk curtains the color of deep wine, and fresh flowers from the palace gardens filled crystal vases throughout the room. "I believe I'll take my evening tea before bed tonight," the queen announced as she settled into her favorite armchair near the window. The excitement of the ball has left me feeling rather wakeful. Isabella's pulse quickened. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She moved to the ornate tea service that was always kept ready in the queen's chambers and began the familiar ritual of preparing the royal bedtime tea. As she measured the delicate blend of chamomile and lavender into the porcelain teapot, Isabella's hands remained perfectly steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Years of training in proper court etiquette served her well now, allowing her to maintain the appearance of calm while her world crumbled around her. The water reached the perfect temperature, and Isabella poured it over the tea leaves with practiced precision. As the tea steeped, she retrieved the small glass vial from her reticule and held it behind her back, her thumb working to remove the tiny cork stopper. "You've seemed rather preoccupied this evening, dear," Queen Evangeline observed, her keen eyes studying Isabella's reflection in the window glass. "Is everything quite all right?" Isabella's heart skipped a beat, but she managed to keep her voice level as she replied, "I'm perfectly well, Your Majesty. Perhaps just a bit tired from the preparations for tonight's ball." The queen hummed thoughtfully. "You work too hard, Isabella. You've been with us for 15 years now, haven't you? Sometimes I think we take your dedication for granted." The words felt like daggers in Isabella's chest. She had devoted her entire adult life to serving the royal family with absolute loyalty and dedication. The thought of betraying that trust made her feel physically ill, but the alternative was even worse. The tea had finished steeping, and Isabella moved to pour it into the queen's favorite cup. Her hand hovered over the delicate porcelain for just a moment as she struggled with the weight of what she was about to do. Then, before she could lose her courage entirely, she tilted the vial and watched 3 small drops of the colorless potion fall into the steaming tea. The sleeping potion dissolved instantly, leaving no trace of its presence. Isabella replaced the cork in the vial and slipped it back into her reticule before carrying the tea service to where the queen waited. "Thank you, dear," Queen Evangeline said, accepting the cup with a grateful smile. "This has become such a treasured part of my evening routine. There's something so comforting about ending each day with a quiet moment and a perfect cup of tea." Isabella watched in fascinated horror as the queen raised the cup to her lips and took her first sip. The taste seemed to meet with approval as the queen settled back in her chair and took another, longer drink. "Tell me," the queen continued, seemingly oblivious to what she had just consumed, "have you given any thought to your future here at court? You're still quite young, and I sometimes wonder if you might wish for a different life. Perhaps marriage and children of your own." The irony of the question wasn't lost on Isabella. Her future was exactly what had led her to this moment of betrayal. "I've been very happy in my service to the crown, Your Majesty," she replied carefully. "I hadn't given much thought to alternatives." Queen Evangeline took another sip of her tea and nodded slowly. "Loyalty is a rare quality these days, Isabella. I hope you know how much your service means to me personally, not just as queen but as a woman who has come to think of you almost as a daughter." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. She had always known that the queen held her in high regard, but hearing it expressed so warmly made her feel like the worst kind of traitor. She forced herself to smile and murmur appropriate words of gratitude while silently counting the minutes until the sleeping potion would take effect. The queen finished her tea within 10 minutes, just as Isabella had hoped. As she prepared for bed, her movements gradually became slower and more deliberate. By the time Isabella had helped her into her nightgown and removed the thornwood tiara from her silver hair, Queen Evangeline was fighting to keep her eyes open. "I feel remarkably tired tonight," the queen murmured as Isabella tucked her into bed. "Perhaps the excitement of the evening was more exhausting than I realized." Isabella smoothed the silk coverlet and made sure the queen was comfortable. "Rest well, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Sweet dreams." Within minutes, Queen Evangeline was sleeping deeply, her breathing slow and regular. Isabella stood beside the bed for a long moment, looking down at the woman who had been her mentor and protector for 15 years. The thornwood tiara sat on the dressing table nearby, its diamonds glinting in the firelight like tiny stars. With hands that trembled despite her best efforts to control them, Isabella wrapped the tiara in a soft cloth and placed it carefully in her reticule. The ancient piece was surprisingly heavy, its weight a constant reminder of the magnitude of her betrayal. The palace corridors were dimly lit at this hour, illuminated only by the occasional oil lamp and the moonlight that filtered through tall windows. Isabella moved silently through the familiar passages, her soft-soled slippers making no sound on the stone floors. She encountered only one guard during her journey to the treasury level, and he merely nodded respectfully as she passed, clearly recognizing her as one of the Queen's trusted ladies-in-waiting. The entrance to the royal treasury was hidden behind a tapestry depicting the founding of the kingdom. Isabella had visited this location only once before, during her initial tour of the palace when she first arrived at court. The heavy oak door was bound with iron and protected by locks both mechanical and magical. Marcus emerged from the shadows just as the great clock in the central tower began to chime midnight. His face was pale in the moonlight, and Isabella could see the conflict in his eyes. Even now, he was struggling with the decision to betray his oath as a royal guard. "Are you certain about this?" he whispered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Once we cross this threshold, there will be no going back. We'll be criminals, fugitives from the very crown we've sworn to serve." Isabella reached up and touched his cheek gently. "I love you, Marcus. That's the only certainty I have left. Everything else feels like it's built on shifting sand." He captured her hand and pressed it against his face, closing his eyes as if trying to memorize the feel of her touch. "I love you too, Isabella. More than duty, more than honor, more than my own life. That's why I'm willing to do this impossible thing." If only he knew the truth, Isabella thought bitterly. If only she could tell him that this wasn't really their choice at all. Marcus produced a small silver key from his uniform pocket and inserted it into the first lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, well-maintained despite its obvious age. The second lock required a different approach entirely. Marcus placed his palm against a smooth crystal embedded in the doorframe and spoke a single word in the ancient language. The crystal glowed briefly blue, then faded back to its normal clear state. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a chamber that took Isabella's breath away. The royal treasury was smaller than she had expected but far more magnificent. Precious metals and gemstones caught the light from their torches and threw it back in dazzling displays of color. Ancient artifacts lined shelves carved from solid stone, each piece representing centuries of royal history and accumulated wealth. But they hadn't come here to admire the collection. Isabella moved quickly to locate the items specified in the blackmail letter while Marcus kept watch at the entrance. The gold chalice was easy to find, displayed prominently on a pedestal near the center of the room. Its surface was covered in intricate engravings that seemed to shift and dance in the flickering torchlight. The jewelry box proved more elusive. Isabella searched through cabinet after cabinet of royal artifacts before finally locating it on a high shelf in the far corner of the treasury. It was smaller than she had expected, no larger than a book, and made from dark wood that had been polished to a mirror shine. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, and when Isabella touched them, she felt a brief tingling sensation in her fingertips. "How much longer?" Marcus asked from his position by the door. "The next guard rotation begins in 8 minutes. Isabella wrapped both items carefully in cloth and placed them in her reticule alongside the tiara. The bag was now quite heavy, but she would manage. They had come too far to fail now. As they prepared to leave the treasury, Isabella paused for one last look around the chamber. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if this might be the last time she ever saw such splendor. By tomorrow night, she and Marcus would be far from the palace, beginning their new life as fugitives from royal justice. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, Isabella felt an unexpected sense of relief. Whatever happened next, at least the terrible weight of secrecy would be lifted from her shoulders. No more stolen moments in hidden corners of the palace. No more pretending that her heart didn't skip a beat every time Marcus entered a room. No more lying to the queen who had shown her nothing but kindness and trust. They locked the treasury door behind them and made their way back through the darkened corridors. Marcus left her at the entrance to the royal wing, as it would be suspicious for a guard to be seen in that area at such a late hour. Isabella climbed the stairs to the queen's chambers alone, her heart pounding with each step. Queen Evangeline was still sleeping deeply when Isabella slipped back into the royal chambers. She moved silently across the thick carpet and carefully removed the thornwood tiara from her reticule. The ancient piece seemed to weigh more than ever as she placed it back on the dressing table, arranging it exactly as it had been when she took it. Looking at the queen's peaceful face, Isabella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had always imagined that if she ever left the palace, it would be with the queen's blessing and best wishes for her future happiness. Instead, she was sneaking away in the night like a common thief, carrying stolen treasures and a heart full of guilt. But it was done. Tomorrow, she would present the stolen items to whoever had orchestrated this elaborate scheme, and in return, she and Marcus would be free to love each other openly. The price was higher than she had ever imagined she would be willing to pay, but love, she had learned, could make people capable of extraordinary things. As Isabella made her way back to her own chambers, she had no idea that her every move had been watched from the shadows. The royal guard had been aware of her relationship with Marcus for months, and tonight's theft had been allowed to proceed exactly as planned. What Isabella didn't know was that the real conspiracy went far deeper than a simple blackmail scheme, and the items she had stolen were about to set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. In her modest chambers in the servants' wing, Isabella lay awake until dawn, clutching the cloth-wrapped artifacts to her chest and trying to convince herself that she had made the right choice. By morning, there would be no turning back from the path she had chosen. She only hoped that love would prove strong enough to sustain them through whatever consequences awaited. Dawn broke over Ravenshollow Palace with an unusual silence that seemed to hang in the air like a held breath. Isabella had managed only an hour of restless sleep before the sound of urgent footsteps in the corridor outside her chambers jolted her fully awake. She sat up in bed, her heart immediately racing as she remembered the weight of the stolen artifacts hidden beneath her mattress. The footsteps passed by her door without stopping, but they were followed by others and then more. Something was happening in the palace, something that had the servants and guards moving with unusual urgency even at this early hour. Isabella dressed quickly in her standard lady-in-waiting attire, taking extra care to ensure that nothing in her appearance would suggest the events of the previous night. As she made her way toward the Queen's chambers to begin her morning duties, Isabella encountered Sarah Mills, one of the younger servants who worked in the kitchens. The girl's face was flushed with excitement and barely contained gossip. "Oh, Lady Isabella," Sarah whispered, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Have you heard? There's been a terrible incident in the East Wing. They say someone tried to break into Lord Chancellor Morrison's private study during the night." Isabella's blood ran cold. "A break-in? Are you certain?" Sarah nodded eagerly, clearly thrilled to be the bearer of such dramatic news. Captain Aldridge discovered signs of forced entry when he made his morning rounds. Papers scattered everywhere, they say, and the Chancellor's private safe had been tampered with. The entire royal guard is in an uproar. The news hit Isabella like a physical blow. If there had been another theft attempt in the palace on the same night that she had stolen from the royal treasury, it could only mean one thing. Whoever was blackmailing her had planned this carefully to create confusion and misdirection. While the guards were investigating the break-in at the Chancellor's study, her own theft might go unnoticed for precious hours longer. "How terrible!" Isabella managed to say, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I should check on the Queen immediately. This news will surely upset her." She hurried away from Sarah before the girl could share any more details, her mind racing with the implications of what she had learned. The blackmailer was clearly far more sophisticated than she had initially realized. This wasn't simply a crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated plan that involved multiple moving parts and precise timing. Isabella reached the Queen's chambers to find them in unusual disarray. 2 guards flanked the entrance, and she could hear voices inside speaking in hushed but urgent tones. When she knocked and announced herself, the conversation inside immediately ceased. "Enter," came the Queen's voice, though it sounded strained and weary. Isabella stepped into the chambers to find Queen Evangeline seated at her writing desk, still in her nightgown and silk robe. Her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her face showed the effects of the unusually deep sleep induced by the sleeping potion. Standing near the window were Captain Marcus Aldridge and Commander William Hastings, the head of the Royal Guard. The sight of Marcus in the Queen's chambers at such an early hour should have been perfectly normal given his duties. But Isabella couldn't help but search his face for any sign of the strain she knew he must be feeling. His expression was carefully neutral, displaying the professional composure expected of a Royal Guard captain. But she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Ah, Isabella," Queen Evangeline said, looking up from a document she had been reading. "I'm afraid we have rather disturbing news this morning. There was an attempted burglary in the palace during the night." Isabella executed a perfect curtsy, using the formal gesture to buy herself a moment to compose her expression. "Sarah mentioned something about Lord Chancellor Morrison's study, Your Majesty. How dreadful that someone would dare to violate the security of the palace." Commander Hastings, a grizzled veteran with steel-gray hair and suspicious eyes, turned his attention to Isabella. "You heard nothing unusual during the night, Lady Thornwick? No sounds that seemed out of place?" The question was clearly routine, but Isabella felt as though the commander could see straight through her carefully maintained facade. "Nothing at all, Commander. I retired shortly after attending to Her Majesty's evening preparations and slept quite soundly until morning." "And what time would you estimate that you finished your evening duties?" Marcus asked, his voice professionally courteous but giving no hint of their personal relationship. Isabella met his eyes briefly, seeing her own anxiety reflected there despite his outward calm. "I helped Her Majesty prepare for bed around 11 o'clock, I believe." She mentioned feeling quite tired after the ball. Queen Evangeline nodded in confirmation. "Indeed, I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't think I've slept so deeply in months." Isabella's chamomile tea was particularly effective last night. The irony of the Queen's innocent comment made Isabella's stomach clench with guilt. She forced herself to smile and accept the unintended praise while her conscience screamed accusations at her. Commander Hastings made a note in the small leather journal he carried. "We're speaking with everyone who was in the palace last night, trying to establish a timeline of events. The break-in appears to have occurred sometime between midnight and 2 in the morning, based on the evidence we've discovered." "What exactly was taken?" Isabella asked, genuinely curious about this second theft that she hadn't known was planned. "That's the peculiar thing," Marcus replied, his brow furrowed in thought. "Nothing appears to be missing from the Chancellor's study. Papers were scattered and furniture was moved, but as far as we can determine, the intruder left empty-handed. Either they were looking for something specific that wasn't there, or they were interrupted before they could complete their theft." Isabella filed this information away carefully. If nothing had been stolen from the Chancellor's study, then the break-in had indeed been nothing more than an elaborate distraction. Her mysterious blackmailer was proving to be far more cunning than she had anticipated. "How unsettling," she murmured aloud. "To think that someone could move through the palace so freely during the night. Are you certain this was the work of an outsider?" The question seemed to hang in the air for a moment, and Isabella immediately regretted asking it. Commander Hastings's eyes sharpened as he studied her face, and she realized that her query might have revealed too much knowledge about palace security procedures. "That's an interesting question, Lady Thornwick," the commander said slowly. "What makes you ask about the possibility of an inside job?" Isabella's mind raced as she searched for a plausible explanation. "I simply meant that the palace is so well guarded, It seems unlikely that a stranger could navigate the corridors without being detected. Perhaps it was someone who knew the layout and the guard rotations. A very astute observation, Queen Evangeline said approvingly. Isabella has always been quite perceptive about such matters. It's one of the qualities that makes her so valuable to the royal household. The praise felt like salt in Isabella's wounds, but she accepted it gracefully while mentally cataloging every word of the conversation. If the royal guard suspected that the break-in was an inside job, their investigation would eventually focus on palace staff and guards with access to sensitive areas. Speaking of valuable household members, Commander Hastings continued, I'll need to speak with each of the Queen's personal staff individually over the course of the day. Lady Thornwick, would you be available for a more detailed interview this afternoon? Isabella's heart skipped a beat, but she managed to nod calmly. Of course, Commander. I'm happy to assist the investigation in any way possible. Excellent. Shall we say 3 o'clock in my office? The commander's tone was polite but left no room for negotiation. After the guards departed, Isabella helped Queen Evangeline dress for the day, trying to maintain her usual efficiency despite the turmoil in her thoughts. The Queen seemed unusually subdued, clearly shaken by the violation of palace security. 15 years, the Queen said suddenly, as Isabella arranged her hair. In 15 years of your service, we've never had a security breach like this. It makes one wonder if the kingdom is changing in ways we don't fully understand. Isabella's hands stilled for a moment in the Queen's silver locks. Change can be frightening, Your Majesty, but it can also bring opportunities for growth and renewal. The Queen met Isabella's eyes in the mirror, and, for a moment, Isabella wondered if she could see the guilt written across her features. But the Queen's expression remained thoughtful rather than suspicious. You're wise beyond your years, my dear. Sometimes I think you understand the complexities of court life better than advisors twice your age. The morning passed in a blur of routine activities that felt anything but normal to Isabella. She attended to correspondence, managed the Queen's schedule, and supervised the preparation of the royal chambers, all while acutely aware of the stolen artifacts hidden in her own room. Every interaction with palace staff felt loaded with potential danger. Every question about her previous evening's activities seemed like a trap waiting to spring. At noon, Isabella received an unexpected message delivered by a young page she didn't recognize. The boy handed her a sealed envelope and disappeared before she could ask any questions. Her name was written on the front in the same elegant handwriting she remembered from the original blackmail letter. Isabella waited until she was alone in an unused sitting room before breaking the seal and unfolding the single sheet of parchment inside. The ravens gather at midnight in the old chapel ruins beyond the eastern wall. Bring what was requested and your freedom will be assured. Come alone or face consequences beyond your imagination. The message was unsigned, but Isabella recognized the authoritative tone that had characterized all the previous communications. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her reticule, her mind already working through the logistics of another dangerous nighttime excursion. The old chapel ruins were located nearly a mile from the palace, in a section of the royal grounds that had been abandoned for decades. Legend claimed that the original chapel had been struck by lightning and burned during the reign of Queen Isadora, the same monarch who had owned the mysterious jewelry box that now rested beneath Isabella's mattress. Some said the fire had been an act of divine judgment against the Queen's rumored involvement in dark magic, while others claimed it was merely an unfortunate accident. Whatever the truth, the ruins had been left as they stood, slowly being reclaimed by vines and wild growth. It was an appropriately dramatic and isolated location for a clandestine meeting with a blackmailer. Isabella spent the afternoon in a state of barely controlled anxiety, going through the motions of her duties while mentally preparing for the evening ahead. Her interview with Commander Hastings proved to be routine but nerve-wracking, with the veteran guard asking detailed questions about her movements the previous evening and her knowledge of palace security procedures. You've been with the royal household for a considerable time, Lady Thornwick, the commander observed as their interview drew to a close. In your experience, Have you noticed any changes in behavior among the staff recently? Anyone who seemed unusually nervous or secretive? The question felt like a direct attack on Isabella's composure, but she managed to maintain her facade of helpful cooperation. Nothing specific comes to mind, Commander. The usual minor disagreements and gossip that one finds in any large household, but nothing that suggested criminal intentions. Commander Hastings made another note in his journal. I understand you have a good working relationship with Captain Aldrich. Has he mentioned any concerns about security or staff behavior? Isabella's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice level. Captain Aldrich is always very professional in his interactions with the household staff. If he had security concerns, I'm certain he would address them through proper channels rather than discussing them with a lady-in-waiting. The commander nodded approvingly. Quite right. Thank you for your time, Lady Thornwick. If you think of anything that might be relevant to our investigation, please don't hesitate to contact me immediately. As evening approached, Isabella found herself growing increasingly nervous about the upcoming meeting. She had no way of knowing who would be waiting for her at the chapel ruins or what their ultimate intentions might be. The entire situation felt far more dangerous and complex than a simple blackmail scheme should be. During dinner service, Isabella managed to catch Marcus's eye across the Great Hall. Using a subtle system of signals they had developed during their secret courtship, she indicated that she needed to speak with him urgently. He responded with a barely perceptible nod, letting her know that he would find a way to meet her. They encountered each other accidentally, in a seldom-used corridor near the palace library an hour after dinner had concluded. Marcus looked around carefully to ensure they weren't being observed before pulling Isabella into an alcove behind a statue of some long-dead king. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, his hands framing her face as he searched her expression. "You looked so pale during the commander's questioning this afternoon. I was terrified that something had gone wrong with last night's plan." Isabella leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his presence even as she struggled with the weight of what she couldn't tell him. "I'm frightened, Marcus. This whole situation feels like it's spinning out of our control." "I know," he whispered, pulling her closer. "I've been thinking about it all day, and I'm starting to wonder if we should confess everything. If we return the stolen items and throw ourselves on the Queen's mercy, perhaps—" "No," Isabella interrupted, perhaps more sharply than she intended. "We can't go back now. Too much has happened, and there are things you don't understand about our situation." Marcus pulled back slightly, studying her face with growing concern. "What things? Isabella, what aren't you telling me?" For a moment, Isabella was tempted to confess everything. The blackmail letters, the threats against both their futures, the real reason she had agreed to steal from the royal treasury. But she couldn't bear the thought of seeing the trust and love in his eyes transform into disappointment and betray.